Welcome in, welcome in. So let's talk Michigan football. Michigan football, what was key to them winning the national championship, it was all about the recruiting classes, right? Big time, excellent recruiting classes, 2020, 2021, 2022. Let's take a look back and see what guys were key in these recruiting classes. 2020 class, Braden McGregor, A.J. Henning, Andrew Gentry, Roman Wilson, Makari Page, Blake Corum, Khalil Mullins. What's interesting with Michigan, they haven't really hit. They obviously don't hit on every player, but kind of like the Detroit Lions and Brad Holmes drafting, Michigan gets a lot of the guys they want, and oftentimes the guy they want turns out to be good. For example, Donovan Edwards and J.J. McCarthy were guys they wanted. They really wanted. They got them. Those guys made an impact, and an impact in big-time games, too. Makari Page, been an excellent player. Khalil Mullins has made some big-time plays, including that pass in the Ohio State game. Nakai Hill-Green, he's no longer with the team, but Hill-Green played well early on at Michigan. Zach Zenner, an excellent career. Jalen Harrell, flash. Chris Jenkins developed into an excellent player, former three-star guy. Talk about Michigan's ability to develop three-star players. That was very apparent with Chris Jenkins. The 2020 class, 2021 recruiting class was really big for Michigan. It was the ultimate. Michigan was at a crossroad, and they needed the 2021 class to make a statement, and they certainly did. Donovan Edwards, J.J. McCarthy, Giovanni El-Hadi, Junior Colson, Rashawn Benny, Rod Moore. Talk about getting like core pieces to help win a national championship, to win multiple Big Ten championships. That's what I love about J.J. McCarthy. A lot of guys talk a lot of talk. J.J. McCarthy talked the talk, and he walked the walk. Guy was just hungry to win. After that Wisconsin win in 2021, he just came back and got to work. J.J. McCarthy was really the piece Michigan was missing for a long time. Even in 2019, 2018, 2016, when Michigan was winning a lot of games, they were still missing that guy. Having that guy at quarterback is so big. Just ask Clemson that. Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. When you get that guy at quarterback, it's so big. Junior Colson. The 2021 class was awesome because you didn't just get you didn't just get really good football players, you got good leaders too. Junior Colson was the leader, showed his toughness in a lot of games, playing in the national championship with an injury. So the 2021 class, definitely a statement for Michigan. Obviously, some guys that didn't necessarily work out. Andre Anthony was an interesting guy. Flashed early, had a big game in the Michigan State game, ended up transferring, just didn't work out for him. But Andre Anthony, a talented player. He was a three-star guy, East Lansing native from Michigan State. Michigan gets him. I like that Michigan has not been afraid to take some swings on three-star guys. Three-star guys may be the most interesting to recruit because the five-star guys, a lot of people know about them. Most live up to the hype, some underperform. And then the four-star guys, a lot of people just kind of pencil them in as good players. And oftentimes they, like five-star guys, don't live up to the hype, but sometimes they're really, really good. But three-star guys are interesting because oftentimes they're guys who do have all the traits to turn themselves into a five-star guy. They're just oftentimes late bloomers. Colston Loveland, I wouldn't necessarily call him a late bloomer, but he's a guy that had all the traits, just small school, just not really garnering the attention. But you saw that even though he wasn't necessarily he was a guy that, I have to go back to his high school tape. I wouldn't say he was a finished product. He's a guy that if you get him the right coaching and you're going to bank on that his work ethic continues, then he's going to play like a 5-star guy, and he's going to play like a guy who's the top tight end in college football and a guy that projects to a first-round pick. And that's exactly what they got with Colson Loveland. So that's why I say 3-star guys are interesting. Oftentimes they have all the traits necessary to be a 5-star guy, they have all the traits that could project them to be an NFL starter. They just have to do it. I have big expectations for Giovanni El-Hadi. I like the way he played when he got his opportunity this year. I think he's a talented football player. He's going to be one of their key guys in the offensive line that they're going to have to replace several pieces. But El-Hadi, Miles Hinton, they do have some experience. Michigan's offensive line should be fine. I think expecting Michigan's offensive line to be as good as the past 2 years, I think is expecting a lot. But to say, I think you can definitively say that if all these guys are healthy, El-Hadi, Miles Hinton, some of the guys on this Michigan offensive line, Andrew Gentry, if they're all healthy, this should be a good offensive line. Big fan of Rod Moore. It's too bad he got it. It's too bad he's not going to play this year. Rod Moore, excellent football player. I think he was from Ohio too, actually. Yep, Clayton, Ohio. Yeah, he was saying stuff against Ohio State that he was disappointed Ohio State didn't recruit him. They certainly missed out there. I think that's how you know things were in Michigan's favor. When Michigan gets a guy from Ohio and he makes an impact against Ohio State, I think that's says definitively that things were in Michigan's favor. Oftentimes when you swing a rivalry, a lot of times it's just due to one team wants it more, one team's just working hard and doing everything right overall. But oftentimes there's just a string of luck. Look at Michigan State, like the 2015. Michigan State did beat Michigan in 2015, but you got to admit that was a lucky play. But it's like there is that old cliche that I'm not even the biggest fan of. It's better to be lucky than good. But oftentimes you get lucky breaks when you've prepared harder and you play harder and you work harder and you prepare better. So Michigan State, even though it was a lucky break, you could argue that Michigan State got that opportunity because they prepared harder, they worked harder. That's oftentimes when people get lucky. How do people get lucky? It's oftentimes it's the team that is prepared and worked the hardest. Not even just in sports, but people that work the hardest often just get lucky breaks. Lucky breaks often are in favor of those who work hard. Yeah, I keep saying this with Michigan. I really think Josiah Stewart is probably the most underrated player on this Michigan football team. Stewart, I thought he would have more of an impact this year, but Josiah Stewart could have a career similar to Aiden Hutchinson and Kwity Paye, and what I mean by that is the first few years at Michigan, Hutchinson and Kwity Paye were seen as good players, and then they really just had that big breakout season. I guess you could argue for Kwity Paye didn't necessarily have that big breakout season, but that last year in 2020, despite a bad year, really propelled his draft stock forward. Same thing with Aiden Hutchinson. Aiden Hutchinson was not really known nationally. A lot of Michigan fans knew him as a good starter, but then that last year at Michigan, everything just took off for him. And he had a dominant year, All-American type season, top 2 NFL draft pick type season, regarded as a really good talent. So I think that could be the Josiah Stewart. If you want to talk about one guy that's outside of Will Johnson, Colston Loveland, Mason Graham, Donovan Edwards, that's already established himself as a playmaker. You want to talk about a guy that hasn't established himself as a playmaker and could really take off. I think Josiah Stewart's that candidate. So keep an eye on Josiah Stewart. Certainly a guy to watch in this Michigan football team. Chris Jenkins, too, another guy like that. I think that's why Michigan's been so successful, even when they didn't win the national championship in 21 and 22. I think with just good coaching and just guys buying in, it's leading to a string of luck in the sense that they're getting guys to develop. Like Derek Moore could be another guy that really takes off this year. Chris Jenkins, a guy that really just developed and got better at Michigan. Chris Jenkins, I just mentioned him. He was a 3-star guy. Just kept getting better and better at Michigan. So that's why good coaching is so key, because you can develop guys. Guys can take off. Good coaching just so important. Here's the 2022 Michigan class. Landing Will Johnson really anchored this class. Not even just because Will Johnson's a superstar, but you look at the 2022 class, Derek Moore, Keon Sabb, Mason Graham, Colston Loveland, Kenneth Grant, a lot of really good players, 2 elite players beside Will Johnson, but Will Johnson was what really got me excited. I guess this class was interesting about this class. I guess, in other words, Will Johnson got this class hyped up because there was not a lot of big names. But it turns out Loveland's a superstar, Mason Graham's a superstar. But I guess what I'm trying to say is Will Johnson was the reassurance you needed from this class. Then Alex Orji. Good recruiting class overall. Then the freshman class this past year in 2023, you didn't really get to see a lot of these guys play a whole lot besides Samaj Morgan. So time will tell with this class. Eno Etta, I think, could be a good player for him. Jair Hill is going to have a chance to get to show what he can do. Cole Cabana is another talented player in this class. Amir Herring, I liked his tape out of high school. Not sure if he's going to get the opportunity this year to play. It might be next year, but you never know. Oh, Amir Herring transferred. Okay, I'm sorry. Frederick Moore. Yeah, I didn't know Amir Herring transferred. That's too bad. I really expected big things from Herring. I thought he'd be a key contributor, maybe not this year, but eventually in the future for him. He's a really good player out of the West Bloomfield area. Looks like he transferred to Kansas. I apologize. I did not know that. Quentin Johnson at safety. Where did they get Quentin Johnson from? or graduate or Johnson. He been with Michigan? Quentin Johnston's been with Michigan. Got to get my facts straight here. It's interesting as a fan. There's a lot of guys you hear their names for several years just from other people and following recruiting, and then you don't see them on the field for like 2 or 3 years. And you're kind of like, oh, that name sounds familiar. Quentin Johnston, one of those guys. Zeke Berry, too. Jacob Oden was a guy I kind of liked. Guy I liked coming out of high school. He'll be a freshman this year. He's from, forget what high school he's from. I could pull it up right here. He'd be one of the many safeties Michigan will have. It's good Michigan does have some depth at safety with Rod Moore going down. Harper Woods. That's where Oden was from. That's right. At least it looks like Michigan's got some depth at edge rusher. Eno Etta, Cameron Brandt, Ike Uwana, Josiah Stewart, Rashawn Benny, Kenneth Grant, Mason Grant. I like Michigan's defensive line. Michigan's defensive line, similar to what I was saying, if their defensive line is healthy, how come I'm not seeing? Why isn't Derek Moore on the depth chart? If Michigan's defensive line is healthy, oh, okay, they got Derek Moore listed as right outside linebacker. If Michigan's defense stays healthy quietly, this could be a very strong. It could be one of the top units in the country, defensive line. Their front seven, it's a strong unit. Yeah, bringing in Jayshon Barnum was a nice move because I think what annoyed the Belleville, Jeremiah Beasley, I'm going to look this up, but I think they brought in Barnum before Beasley came, or after Beasley was committed. Or after Beasley had enrolled in the spring. When did Barnum transfer? I think that was part of Jeremiah Beasley transferring. Jayshon Barnum. December Barnum committed to Michigan. So yeah. But I don't know. Here's the thing they always say about high school kids. To me, Beasley was a guy I think that could play right away. But it's interesting. Coaches would always say really great players never asked about playing time or weren't concerned about playing time. So to me, Beasley transferring, I don't want this to sound like I'm making an assumption that he's not a competitor, because I think he is a competitor and he's a tremendous football player. But to me, does that say that he was not ready to compete? Like, did Missouri guarantee him a spot? So I don't know. Maybe the Barnum thing had something to do with it. But then again, would Beasley, I think he may project more to a weak side linebacker. I keep talking about Beasley. I know he's not with the team, but it is interesting. I wonder if I pull it up, if he explain why he transferred. He strikes me as a guy that would want to play right away. I don't know anything about him. I've never met him, but he just strikes me as a kid that would want to play right away. So here's the reason why Beasley transferred. The whole defensive coaching staff leaving. It was a different feel with a whole different staff and just didn't feel like a fit. Okay. So yeah, I do question that he's a guy that maybe isn't that hungry to compete. And I'm not trying to attack him personally, but I always hear those stories about great players just kind of figure out a way to make it work. Like Trevor Lawrence committed to Clemson, right? He was going to make it work at Clemson. He was going to find a way on the field one way or another. So I'm not saying that Beasley is not going to be a great player, but great players find a way to make it work at the first school. So it'll be interesting what happens with Beasley's career. But to me, maybe that might be a good thing for Michigan, and in turn, maybe a good thing for Beasley. Should be a strong tight end unit. I like Brady Prescorn, freshman out of Rochester Adams. Good player. Zach Marshall, Colston Loveland, that's the depth at tight end. Nice tight end unit. I think Prescorn should get some playing time. Guy with some size, good route running ability, good movement skills overall for a tight end that big. That's what really stands out to me about Prescorn. But Arlands, here's the whole projected starting defense for Michigan. Rashawn Benny, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart, Jashawn Barham, Ernest Hausman, Derek Moore, Jair Hill, Makari Page, Quentin Johnson, Will Johnson, Jaden McBurrows. McBurrows is a guy that's been there for several years now. He's a guy that was involved in the tunnel incident between Michigan State. Then on offense, Michigan, Frederick Moore, Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan round out their projected starting wide receivers. Offensive line, Miles Hinton, Josh Preeb, a graduate transfer. I think he was out of Northwestern. Yep. Giovanni El-Hadi, projected starter right guard. Greg Crippen, projected center. Andrew Gentry at right tackle. Alex Orji, quarterback. Donovan Edwards, running back. I'm not sleeping on Jaden Davis anymore. I'll say this. A lot of times I really have to do my homework a little bit more. Sadly. Jaden Davis, the more I watch his tape, the more he grows on me. Watching his tape really wowed me in the sense when he rolls out and throws, a lot of his throws doesn't even look like he throw them that hard. They just slowly glide and zip right in the receiver's hands. And his ability to throw on the run is excellent. So there's a lot of things that stand out about Jaden Davis's game. I think Orji certainly has a head start in the quarterback race, but don't be surprised if Jaden Davis gets some opportunities this year. Not even if Orji struggles, but I think just because of Jaden Davis's talent, I think a talent like that you don't want to leave on the bench. So keep an eye out for Jaden Davis. Also do have Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle. Jack Tuttle been in the was to be a second year in the program, former transfer from Indiana. Also was at Utah. Running back have several guys. Donovan Edwards, Khalil Mullins, Benjamin Hall. Those are guys all three with experience, playing experience. Donovan Edwards, Khalil Mullins, Benjamin Hall, Tavier Dunlap, and Cole Cabana. Max Bredesen, 2 at fullback. So Frederick Moore did play last year for Michigan. Tyler Morris, too. So quietly, Michigan does have some experience at wide receiver. Tyler Morris, Frederick Moore, and Samaj Morgan. The cupboard isn't bare at wide receiver, even though Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, both good players. It is nice that they do return some experience. I like Cornelius Johnson. He made some big plays and big moments for Michigan for sure. Roman Wilson was excellent. 12 touchdowns, 789 yards receiving. Roman Wilson, excellent player for Michigan. Quietly a really good career at Michigan, actually. Roman Wilson, another one of those guys, not even an edge rusher that got better and better, but a receiver that just kept getting better and better. And eventually his last year just breaks out. Michigan, you have to give the coaching staff a lot of credit. And Jim Harbaugh, that Michigan, a lot of schools aren't really like that. Not in college, in high school, a lot of that's a testament to good coaching. You just get players that get better and better and eventually have a last season where they just break out. That does happen at other colleges, but Michigan did an exceptional job of doing that. A lot of credit to the coaching staff. Going to pull up the schedule here in just a moment. Probably the best schedule in Michigan football history, best home schedule, at least. I can't remember a schedule like this. Michigan, 2015 had an interesting non-conference schedule where they played BYU, Oregon State. That was an interesting non-conference. But this year's season's cool. It's crazy that they're playing USC, Oregon. I never thought I'd see a season Michigan playing USC, Oregon, Washington, and they're all in the same conference too. And Texas. Texas in the non-league. Pretty awesome. Awesome stuff and a lot to be excited for. It's crazy USC and Texas are at home, too. Especially in the first 4 games. You're going to have Texas and USC coming to the big house in the first 4 weeks of college football. Crazy stuff. Got Michigan's schedule pulled up here. Opening with Fresno State. The bottom line with this game is they should win it. It's one of those games, if Michigan loses this game, then you're kind of like, in most seasons, losing that game, you'd be like, oh, crap. I think in this season, especially with the new coaching staff coming off of a huge storybook season, I think it'd be an even bigger oh, crap, because then you're asking, number one, when's our next win coming from? And then number 2, how many losses are we going to have total? So you can't pencil it in right now. You got to play the game. Do you want to start that season off with a win? Obviously, every team wants to start the season off with a win, but after the season Michigan had, arguably the best season in school history. I actually think you can say that emphatically since since it's the most games they've won in the season. Obviously, they did win the national championship in '97, but they didn't win 15 games. So coming off your best season, arguably in school history. You don't want a big oh crap moment with a opening loss at home to Fresno State. Week 2, Texas comes to Ann Arbor. Michigan gets Texas at home on Fox, big noon kickoff. I assume College Game Day will be there. I don't know. Maybe they'll be somewhere else, but I assume they'll be there. Going to play against Quinn Ewers, a quarterback that certainly can sling the ball around. So Michigan going to want to win that game. Similar to how I said losing to Fresno State would be an oh crap moment and really make people question. I think Michigan, on the flip side of that, Michigan starting 2-0 with wins against Fresno State and wins against Texas, I think that would be the ultimate nod your head and smile like Michigan has a chance to be really good again. I know that's only 2 wins, and I believe Michigan will most likely be favored against Texas, but starting 2-0 with wins over Fresno State and a really good Texas team, most likely a top 10 Texas team, that'll give you a lot of momentum. That'll give you a huge boost of confidence. Week 3, they play Arkansas State at Michigan. Not really sure how Arkansas State is. I'll look up quickly what the record was last year. Arkansas State was 6-7 last year. They got beat badly by Oklahoma 73-0. Still in the Sun Belt Conference. Beat ULM, beat Louisiana, beat Texas State. Another game Michigan should win at noon, Big Ten Network. Then USC, 3:30 CBS. I kind of like the Big Ten doing CBS games. I like Brad Nessler. Brad Nessler on the call. I think he does a good job, him and Gary Danielson. Minnesota. Quietly, Michigan has a tough first 5 games. Like, Minnesota's not going to be a slouch. I think everyone's going to expect Michigan to beat them. But Minnesota is a team, Michigan's handily beat them the last few years. Minnesota is a team that if Michigan's coming off a big win to USC in that week prior, that could be a trap for Michigan, especially then Washington's 2 weeks after they play USC. And then as we sit now, they do play Illinois and Michigan State. Those appear to be winnable games. But you never know. Michigan State could be much improved. Illinois could have a year where they have a bunch of studs on defense again like a couple years ago. Oregon, November 2nd. At Indiana, November 9th. Home versus Northwestern, November 23rd. And then at Ohio State, November 30th. Big Ten Championship game, December 7th. If Michigan gets back there, a lot of that will be indicative of that game I just mentioned against Ohio State. Maybe we will get another showdown between Michigan and Ohio State, 11-0, all the marbles, everything, all the chips on the table, everything on the line, whatever expression you want to use. Maybe we will get another one of those. Washington could be tough. I'm more confident that Michigan will beat Washington just because Kalen DeBoer is not there anymore. No Michael Penix. So I believe Michigan will beat Washington, but that's one of those games that, for example, if Michigan lost to Texas, suddenly, I think why the Texas game's so key, because if Michigan loses to Texas, hypothetically, you become less confident against on how they match up with USC, Minnesota. Now you have to see how the game plays out, but right now we could pencil Michigan beating USC, Minnesota, and Washington in. But until we see how Michigan looks early against Fresno State and Texas, we don't have a lot to really go off of to back that prediction up. I think the only thing, if I'm going to guarantee anything, not that my guarantee is anything special, but if I'm going to guarantee anything, I would guarantee Michigan beats Fresno State. Then it sets up for Michigan, Texas, both 1-0. Going to be a huge viewership game. 2 blue blood programs at noon Saturday. Beautiful weather in Michigan. So that's the schedule. Fresno State, Texas, Arkansas State, USC, Minnesota, Washington, Illinois, Michigan State, Oregon, Indiana, Northwestern, and then Ohio State. Pull up Michigan's coaching staff. Sherrone Moore, the head coach. Pull up Moore's bio. He was at Central Michigan. That's what I know about Sherrone Moore. Moore played at Oklahoma, too. I guess I didn't realize that. Started his career at Louisville, 09 through 11 as a grad assistant. Tight ends coach at Louisville, 2012 and 2013. Central Michigan tight ends coach. Assistant head coach, recruiting coordinator for Central in 2017. Tight ends coach at Michigan, 2018 to 2020. And then 21-22, the offensive line, then co-offensive coordinator. Then this year, offensive line coach and offensive coordinator. Then now Michigan's head coach. Then Wink Martindale. Wink Martindale, quite a long resume going back to the 80s, starting as a defensive coordinator at Defiance, Ohio. Assistant at Notre Dame in 94-95. Transitioned to the NFL in 2004, was with the Oakland Raiders from 04 to 08, 09 with the Broncos, 2010 with the Broncos, 2012 to 2017 with the Ravens as the linebackers coach, 18 to 21. Had a strong run as the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, and then 2022, 2023, defensive coordinator for the New York Giants, then now the defensive coordinator, University of Michigan. Tony Alford, still the running backs coach. Or I say still the running backs coach. He was the running backs coach at Ohio State, now at Michigan. Steve Kasula, the tight ends coach. He was at Massachusetts last year. He was the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, now the tight end coach at Michigan. Defensive run game coordinator, linebacker, his coach Brian Jean Mary. Mary was at Tennessee the last couple years. The last 3 years, 2021 through 2023. Grant Newsome, offensive line. He's been at Michigan since 2018. Student assistant, tight ends coach, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 21. Graduate assistant, offensive line, tight ends coach last year, and then now the offensive lines coach. Quarterback coach, Kurt Campbell. Or their offensive coordinator is Kurt Campbell. Campbell's been at Michigan since 2021. Offensive analyst. Last year, the quarterback's coach. Then now, offensive coordinator, quarterback's coach. J.B. Brown, the special teams coordinator. Ron Bellamy, the offensive pass game coordinator and wide receivers coach. So some mix of some guys that have been there, guys from other notable schools, and then you got Wink Martindale, a defensive coordinator coming from the NFL, spent some time in college. Defensive pass game coordinator, defensive backs coach is Lamar Morgan. Morgan was at Louisiana Lafayette, now moves over to Michigan. Was at Louisiana Lafayette 2022 and 2023, was at Vanderbilt in 21. So a strong staff overall for Michigan. I like it. I think it's a staff where, unless one unit is extremely strong, hopefully there's not a big change next year. But it's a strong coaching staff overall. Go back to Michigan's depth chart. This year is interesting because if you compare this year's depth chart to last year, you could argue Michigan's taking a step back on every unit. But Michigan's still, like, not to say Michigan will repeat as national champions, but if you want to make the case, like Georgia from 2021 to 2022 took a step back, but in 2022 they were still the best team in college football. So even if Michigan, I guess the point I'm trying to make is even if you take a step back, if you take a step back and you're still the best team in college football, you can still win a national championship. So, not to be like not to sound like I'm heading down the path of predicting Michigan to go back to back, but the main point I'm trying to make is you don't have to be. Michigan doesn't have to be as good as last year. They only have to be as good as the second best team in college football, if they are the best team. I guess I'm not making that point very well. I'm not really articulating that point, but. Main thing I'm trying to say is Michigan may not be as good as last year, but I think they're still good enough to win a national championship despite taking a step back. I think if Rod Moore doesn't get hurt, I think you could make the case that Michigan would be stronger this year in the secondary. But with Rod Moore getting hurt, I would say it's about a wash if you compare this year's secondary to last year's secondary. The linebacking, I think one position group that you could argue is better this year, probably the linebacking core, just with Barham transferring. I think if Hausman plays better and Barham is a stud, then you can say Hausman, you could say Barnum's probably on par with Junior Colson. You could say Hausman is at least on par or better than Michael Barrett. So you'd say the linebacking core may be better. I don't think the defensive line is better than last year, even though it might be. It's not as deep. The starters might be better, but it's not as deep as last year. The defensive line last year was deeper. Running back, I think, is deeper this year, but I don't think it's as good overall top-end talent. Cole Cabana, I keep an eye on Cole Cabana, too. Not just because I watched Cole Cabana play in high school. He's a guy that's very talented, not getting a lot of hype. There's always that guy that when fall camp starts getting a lot of buzz. That guy could be Cole Cabana. Keep an eye on that guy. Receivers pretty much on par. I think it's kind of I think until we see Michigan play this year, I think it's kind of hard to compare this team with last year. Because right now you're kind of just going with on paper. You're going with, like, comparing this, like, we haven't really seen Jair Hill play much. We haven't seen Jay Sean Barnum play at Michigan. So it is kind of, it's a fun game to play, but it's kind of hard to do until we see Michigan play this year. Greg Crippen, Michigan State. So Crippen was at IMG Academy. Was he the center for McCarthy at IMG Academy then? So redshirt junior, so would have been a high school class of 21. I wonder if he was the center with McCarthy. Because McCarthy was at IMG Academy. I don't see Crippen on Michigan's recruiting class. Was he a transfer? Did Crippen transfer in 20? Really excited what Michigan did in the transfer portal last year. Prior to the 23 season. Josh Wallace was good. A.J. Barner, good. Jack Tuttle won the backup job. Nugent was a stud at center. Josiah Stewart, even though he was in the rotation, gave him good play. Miles Hinton, he's going to get a chance to start. Ernest Hausman will get a chance to play. And then Ladarius Henderson. Really nice season. So Michigan really struck gold last year with the transfer portal. A lot of these guys are going to get some of these guys are back and going to get a chance to show what they can do this year. But yeah, Michigan really struck gold in the transfer portal last year. It is pretty awesome, though. I keep saying it. Michigan plays Texas and USC. This is the dream schedule. This is the schedule you want. So Michigan, that's really exciting. That's going to be kind of a surreal moment to see Texas, then USC at the Big House in a 4-week span. That's going to be interesting to see. That's something you're not going to see too often. Wish Michigan played UCLA this year, but their schedule is so tough and as it is. The schedule kind of reminds me of Michigan's 2012 schedule. I'll pull that up. The 2012 schedule: Alabama, Air Force, Massachusetts, Notre Dame. So you had that 4-week stretch where you had two tough opponents. They lost to both Alabama and Notre Dame, but both really good football teams. Then Michigan also lost to Ohio State, really good team. South Carolina, good team. They probably should have won that game. But the point I'm trying to make is 2012 was the season they were good. I would say they were good. But the games they lost were to really good football teams. So what I'm getting at, Michigan may lose 3 games this year. Like Michigan could lose to Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. I think 9-3 with this schedule Michigan has. Number one, it may be good enough to get them in the playoffs. But number two, it's not anything to. It's not necessarily anything to brag about, but you should be somewhat happy with it. You should be somewhat content. I like with this schedule, there's no more people questioning Michigan's strength of schedule. You can't question Michigan's strength of schedule anymore. It is just cool to see blue bloods on the schedule. That's been the issue with college football over the years. People have become tired of some of these matchups. I think that's what hurt the Pac-12. People would get excited. USC versus Oregon, USC versus Washington, USC, UCLA. Those matchups sound fun. How many people are tuning in to, even though Oregon State had some decent years, how many people are tuning in to Oregon State versus Washington State? Or Oregon State versus Arizona? Or Arizona versus Stanford? Who's tuning into that? I think that's what the cool thing about these super conferences. It's just more. It's matchups that sound more intriguing. Matchups that get you a little bit more excited. Here's the thing. Even if USC's bad next year, Michigan USC just sounds fun. It sounds exciting. 2 blue blood programs. Michigan, when you think Michigan, you think national champions, strong program. Then USC, you think the Pete Carroll eras. You think Lincoln Riley. You think excitement, offense, points, developing quarterbacks. So Michigan USC just has more flavor, more spice to it than Oregon State, or even Indiana Northwestern, Purdue Northwestern. That's what was really starting to hurt college football. That's why I think viewership will be up this year most weeks in college football just because of the intriguing matchups. A lot of people touched on the college football is heading towards kind of the NFL model. That's kind of what it is. The Big Ten and Pac-12, the Big Ten and SEC similar to the AFC and NFC. That's why even though I'm not for playoff expansion, if you do win one of these conferences, the SEC or Big Ten with all as loaded as they are, you really have earned the right to get in the playoff. You really have run the gauntlet. The SEC winner next year, even if they have 2 losses, they've got it. They still have earned their right to get in. So even though I'm not a fan of playoff expansion, winning the SEC or the Big Ten really means something, and it's certainly earning the right to play for a championship and earning the right to get into the college football playoff as well. Got the countdown. So Michigan, Fresno State we're 53 days away from that matchup. So about 60 days away from Michigan, Texas, squaring off on September 7th. Exciting month of September for Michigan. Texas, Arkansas State, USC, Minnesota. Crazy, crazy month of September for Michigan. Then at Ohio State, I would hope Michigan beats Ohio State again, but you never know. Ohio State's going to be really good. Ohio State's going to be a really strong football team next year. Pull up Ohio State's depth chart. Ohio State really looks the part on paper. Caleb Downs, they landed from Alabama, the transfer safety. Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke. They've got good players. I think the issue with Ohio State, it's been a lot more sizzle than steak. And what I mean by that, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, those are both highly recruited guys, and they've been good, but they've never really become elite. Same with Denzel Burke. Denzel Burke talked about as the next great Ohio State corner, and they've had many good ones, but he's never really become elite. I think that's what's held Ohio State back is their elite players have been at quarterback and wide receiver, Harrison, Smith, and Jigba Stroud. But outside of that, the wide receiver position, the quarterback position where they've had elite play, even under Ryan Day, they did have Justin Fields. Outside of elite play at wide receiver and quarterback, it's been a lot of solid, a lot of good. But that's what's tough. Being solid and being good isn't always good enough to win you a national championship. Well, this is something I didn't know. I didn't know Ohio State landed Seth McLaughlin. That's the transfer from Alabama, the center. Will Howard. I keep forgetting they landed Will Howard. He was at Kansas State. TreVeyon Henderson. TreVeyon Henderson, another guy too. 5-star running back. He's been good, but TreVeyon Henderson's not a guy that scares me. Watch, I say that now he's going to have a big game next year against Michigan. But I don't watch TreVeyon Henderson and go, I don't think I'm watching Ezekiel Elliott again, a guy that's going to be that projects well to the next level and be a superstar. I don't get that vibe from TreVeyon Henderson, even though he's a good player. And they landed Judkins, too. Judkins may get... I like Judkins. He's from Ole Miss. He may start getting more snaps than Henderson. But Ohio State, a lot of solid, a lot of good, but just not a lot of elite overall. So I'm going to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Brant Marshall Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips.